I, 47 male, and my wife, 46 female, had been married for 17 years when we got divorced. I met her in college. We were good friends at first, but after a while, I developed a bit of a crush on her and I asked her out. We dated for a few years before she ended up getting pregnant. When our son was 3 years old, we ended up getting married. In total, we've been together for 23 years. Throughout all of the years we had been together, I thought we were happy and in love. We watched all of our friends go through countless struggles with their relationships while we remained steady throughout everything. The only issue that ever really arose for us was the fact that my wife liked the attention of other men. It was something that I felt insecure about at first, but over the years I had gotten used to it. As far as I was aware, she never did anything with other men, but she would get dressed up to go places because she knew she would be catching their eyes. She would flirt with bartenders or waiters to get free things at restaurants. She told me that it made her feel confident and sexy, and after giving birth and getting a bit older, she was having issues with her confidence. I did everything in my power to assure her that I thought she was the most beautiful woman on the planet. She just wanted to be desired by other people. It made her feel like she had this feminine power, and she didn't want to lose it. My wife was very good looking. She took care of herself, going to the gym regularly, taking care of her skin and hair, and wearing clothes that aligned with the latest trends. I always thought that I was very lucky to have her. We only had one child together, our son. Sending him off to college was difficult for my wife and me. We had gotten so used to him being around the house that everything felt empty without him there. It was a hard pill to swallow, but he was moving on with his life, and there wasn't anything we could do about it. When we dropped him off the first semester of his freshman year, I was very aware that his roommate was surprised at how his mother looked. My wife caught on to that as well. On the car ride home, she kept laughing about how she felt like the hottest girl in the world. We made jokes about it, and I never thought anything would really come of it. His university was a 6-hour drive away from us, so when we went to pick him up at the end of the fall semester, I kind of assumed that my wife would dress for a road trip. We were going to be on the road for 12 hours, and it was probably expected to be wearing sweaters and comfortable pants, things like that. Instead, she got dolled up to go pick our son up. She wore tight jeans and a t-shirt that exposed a lot of her cleavage. She was wearing makeup, and she curled her hair in the morning. I didn't quite understand why she was making such an effort to go pick him up. Part of me knew that it was because she wanted the boys in his dorm to pay attention to her, and it kind of weirded me out. Thankfully, when we arrived, a lot of the students had already left for the winter break, so she didn't get as much of the validation that I thought she wanted. However, our son's roommate was still there. He was very clearly attracted to my wife, and he kept staring at her while we were helping my son pack his things. It was honestly something that I was considering addressing with her when we got home, but my son beat me to it. On the car ride back, he told my wife that he wasn't happy with how she dressed around some of the guys in his college. She promised him that she would make sure to cover up in the future, almost shrugging it off like it was a joke in some ways. I could see that my son was actually embarrassed by how his friends reacted to her. I didn't like that she was playing it off like it wasn't a big deal. When we got home later that evening, I continued the conversation with her. I told her that it was starting to make me uncomfortable, and she was acting somewhat defensive about it. Instead of getting into an argument, we both just dropped it and figured we would deal with it when the time came in the future. A couple of years passed and our son was a junior in college. Regardless of how my wife dressed going to pick him up and drop him off, some of his friends and roommates still made comments about how she looked. She listened to what we said and stopped wearing such revealing clothes, but it didn't help. At the end of his junior year, we went to help him move out of his apartment off campus. We drove to the university and helped him load everything into my truck, as we always did. He was living in an apartment with 3 other guys, one of whom was the roommate that he had during his freshman year. On the car ride back, he asked us if it was okay for one of his friends to come visit for a week. There was a film festival nearby that they both wanted to go to and I said that it would be fine. My wife agreed with that. A few weeks passed while our son was home and we were drawing closer to his friend coming to visit. In those weeks, my wife was on her phone a lot more than she normally was. She was texting with someone and every now and then I would hear her on the phone whispering. I had no idea who she was talking to. One night, my wife was in the shower and I went in to brush my teeth. I saw through the glass shower door that she had her phone in the shower with her and she was recording herself. She stopped when I walked in, but it was obvious what she was doing and denied it when I said it looked like she was recording herself. Our son's friends came to visit for the week as we expected, and everything started out normal. I could see that he was extra nice to my wife because he was obviously attracted to her. I figured that my son would be with him during the day, so it never occurred to me that my wife would have any alone time with him. We had a pool at our house that my wife used quite often. In the summer months, she would swim in it regularly for exercise as well as use it for recreation. I came home from work one day and I saw my wife outside in a very small bikini with our son's friend. They were both in the pool playing around with each other and splashing water in each other's faces. They kept diving under the water and grabbing each other to pull them under. It looked like they were just looking for an excuse to touch each other. Neither of them noticed me coming right away, so I hid from them. I didn't want them to see me because I was curious about what exactly was happening with them. We had cameras in the backyard, so instead of going outside, I went into my office and logged in to watch the cameras live. Neither of them had any idea that I was home, much less watching them. I saw them, as clear as day, both go under the water and kiss each other. When they came back up, my wife looked around the pool area to make sure the coast was clear, then kissed him again. I could faintly hear what they were talking about through the audio, but they were saying something about how glad they were to finally have some time alone. Right after that, my wife started touching him and reaching inside his swim trunks. He said something about not being sure they had the time, but my wife told him that she thought it was even hotter because of that. They finished what they were doing and my wife told him that she would visit him in the guest room after I went to bed. My gut had told me that there was something going on with her that I didn't know. I hated seeing that I was right to think that. We had been together for a very long time, and I trusted her more than anyone in the world, and she broke that. I didn't know if they had slept together already, but it was clear that they were planning on it. What they did in the pool was already cheating, but they were about to take it even further. They both toweled off and went inside, and I quickly turned off the footage and made it look like I was busy doing something for work. My wife walked by the office and commented on how she had no idea I was home. I tried to cover my emotions and play it off like I had just walked in the door. She came to me about an hour later and told me that it was time for dinner, but I lied and told her I wasn't feeling well and was just going to focus on work instead. I couldn't stomach being around her. I knew that I was going to catch her in the act with our son's friend later that night, and I didn't think I was going to be able to pretend to be okay with everything. All I needed was to get the evidence to prove that she was having an affair. I pretended to go to sleep around the time that I usually did. My wife climbed into bed next to me and stayed there for about half an hour while I pretended to sleep. When she thought I was completely out, she quietly climbed out of the bed and left. I waited about 5 minutes and made my way to the guest room that they were both in. They were clearly trying to be quiet on the other end, but I could hear the squeaking of the bed frame underneath them. I pulled out my phone camera and started recording so I could open the door quickly and have the video evidence that I caught them. I opened the door and saw my wife naked and on top of our son's friend having sex with him. They were both shocked when I opened the door and my wife quickly jumped off of him to run over to me. I had already started walking away from the room when she caught up to me. She was trying to whisper and be as quiet as possible about the entire ordeal to avoid waking up our son, but I yelled back at her. I told her that I didn't understand how she could do that, especially with our son's friend. It didn't take long for our son to wake up and stand in his doorway, asking us about what was going on. I looked at my wife and waited for her to explain to him what she'd been doing. When she told him what happened, my son rushed into the room where his friend was and tried to attack him. He yelled at him and called him a myriad of names that I can't repeat here. I ended up breaking them up and taking my son out of the house because he was so frustrated. I understood where he was coming from, but I didn't want him to get in trouble. We were gone for about an hour, just driving around and letting off some steam. When we got back to the house, his friend was gone. He packed all of his things and driven off. My son yelled at his mother, telling her that what she did was wrong and she should have been ashamed. She cheated on a man who had stood by her for almost 25 years for somebody half her age. My wife ended up realizing that there wasn't going to be a way to smooth over what she did, so she left the night and booked herself a hotel room. In the morning, I had a conversation with my son to tell him that because of what happened, I would be leaving his mother. He completely understood and he told me that if I hadn't gone to him about it, he would have suggested it himself. I could see that my son was almost as hurt as I was about everything. Not only was his mother cheating and their parents getting divorced, but one of his best friends was now out of his life because of it. I felt immensely bad for him and I couldn't believe that his mother would do something like that to him. I started the divorce proceedings and prepared myself for anything that might come my way. My son told his other roommates about what happened and that he didn't want to live in an apartment with his old friend anymore. Because they were renting an apartment off campus, they agreed that they wouldn't be living with him. They sent him a message and told him that he would have to find another housing option. When it got closer to time to drop my son back off at school, we realized that his friend had to move back into on-campus housing. Because it was so last minute, he ended up living with a nightmare roommate who couldn't find anybody else to live with them. On top of that, the on-campus housing was almost twice as expensive as renting an apartment off campus as they planned, so he was forced to take out several extra loans to cover the cost. Having had to pay off my own student loans, I knew that was going to bite him in the butt for quite some time. As for my wife, we did get divorced. She didn't work, she was a homemaker, so she was forced to get a job and start taking care of herself. I was awarded the house and I ended up selling it because I didn't need everything that was in there. I bought a much smaller house in a different neighborhood with enough room for my son and me. He seemed to really like it when I showed it to him over the winter break. Now he has graduated college and I am living in a new house by myself. My son is living in an apartment by himself in the city for his job. It's been about a year and a half since everything happened and I'm trying to get myself back out there. I spent almost 25 years with my ex-wife and I don't know how to date moving forward. OP, your wife was extremely selfish in her actions and I think her need for attention from other men escalated. I don't know what it was about your son's roommate in particular that caused her to take a step forward in that direction, but it did. Her desire to have male attention in general was already concerning given what she did for it. It seems like your son was very close with the man she slept with too. Having an affair is already bad enough, but with your son's friend is just awful. I can't even begin to imagine how he must feel about her after everything. I understand if he's angry and doesn't want anything to do with her. Karma really bit both your wife and your son's friend in the butt in the end. You're right, he is going to be paying off those excess student loans for quite some time and I'm sure he's really going to regret his actions because of that. Now let's move on to our next story. My girlfriend and I had been together since high school. I loved her and I genuinely thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with her. She and I always had an opposites attract kind of relationship. I'm very outgoing, athletic, and into sports. She's a bit of a nerd. She spends all of her time reading, she gets very involved in internet fandoms, and she isn't as interested in working out. We started dating during the last semester of our senior year in high school when we were paired up in a science lab together. We lived in a small town and I knew who she was, but I hadn't paid much mind to her. I got to talking to her in the lab and I felt a connection to her that I couldn't really explain. We had been together ever since. We went to different colleges but we stayed loyal to each other and saw each other as often as possible. After we both graduated, we moved into our first apartment together. We both got jobs. She landed her dream job as a teacher and I worked at a tech company. We spent a lot of time together and we tried to share each other's interests. We both had a hard time getting into some of the things the other liked. She was very involved in a lot of online forums and pages dedicated to some of the fandoms she was in. She met a lot of online friends through those places and she talked to them more than almost anybody else that she knew. My girlfriend had always wanted to try cosplaying. There were a ton of characters that she was interested in and when a convention was in our area, she decided she wanted to do it. She dressed up and really found that she loved doing it. I ended up going to the convention with her because she was too nervous to go alone. Dozens of people approached her and told her about how much they loved her costume and she was having the time of her life. After that, she started doing it all the time. Even when there wasn't a convention, she was hyper-fixating on characters she wanted to cosplay as and she would toy around with makeup and clothes to try and make the costumes. As she got more into cosplaying, I noticed that some of her outfits were a little bit more revealing. They showed off more of her body and they started turning into hypersexual versions of characters. She took a lot of pictures in them and she always did, despite how I told her I wasn't comfortable with her sharing the images. She told me that they were only being sent to her longtime friends and that it wasn't anything I should worry about. I trusted her so I believed what she said. Several months went by and a large convention was coming to her city. I didn't have a good time at the last convention I attended with her, so I didn't really want to go but I would have if she wanted me to. She told me that because the convention was a big deal, one of her friends from her Discord group was going to be attending. When I asked about the friend, my girlfriend gave me the name Jamie, which I now know isn't real and use they/pronouns when speaking about them. I didn't want to ask outright about them, but my girlfriend had a lot of non-binary and transgender friends, so I kind of assumed that it was something like that. I never thought she was purposefully withholding using the pronouns he/him to try to deceive me. The time came for the convention and I just assumed that everything was normal between us and she was meeting up with an online friend. It all seemed very harmless to me. She was rushing around the apartment in the morning trying to get ready and communicate with her friend to make sure they were on the same page about where to meet. I helped her put some last-minute pieces together for her costume and said goodbye to her before she left. I was lying in bed thinking about going back to sleep for an hour when I kept hearing notifications go off on her laptop. It was annoying me, so I got up to see what it was. Her laptop was open on her desk in her room like it was 90% of the time. This time, instead of turning her laptop off, she put it to sleep. I rubbed my hand along the trackpad and it lit up showing me her Discord account. There were dozens of messages in there from people and groups she was in. I was a little bit curious and I know it was somewhat of an invasion of privacy, but I sat down and took a peek at the server. I saw that she was on countless servers on Discord, which I already knew about, but some of them were NSFW servers. That was a surprise to me. There were messages popping up on the corner of the screen with people pinging her and telling her about how good she looked. I assumed she posted a picture of herself in the cosplay that I helped her with that morning. I clicked on one of the servers that people were tagging her in and I saw that she posted a picture of herself in the costume. She was standing in front of a bathroom mirror and lifting up her shirt. There were a lot of people in the server saying very explicit things about what they wanted to do to her. I looked through the history she had in it and saw that she had been posting very similar things a lot. Through the server and her private messages, I was able to figure out that the person she was meeting was in fact a guy and she had every intention of sleeping with him. They were both going to be dressed up in character and they were going to post a video for the server. I took a lot of screenshots of the things that I found and I sent all those to myself. While I was doing that, she sent in another picture of her with the guy that she was meeting at the convention. There were people in the server who already knew what was happening and they were putting in specific requests for things for them to do when they hooked up. It was all really weird. My girlfriend liked a lot of the comments and promised people that they were going to be in for a show. I kept my eye on the server for the rest of the day, curious to see what exactly was going to happen. When I wasn't checking on that, I was packing up my belongings to move out. Even if she wasn't having sex with another man, everything that she was sending to strangers on the internet felt like a violation of our relationship. On top of that, she had hidden all of it away from me, so it felt like she was lying. I got a lot of my things together and prepared to leave by the end of the day. I was going to go crash at a friend's house until I could find another apartment. Towards the end of the day, my girlfriend sent a link to the server for anyone to click on. When I clicked on it, I saw that it was a full sex tape. She hooked up with the guy that she had gone there with. I didn't understand her motive in making this tape and sending it to all of these people. It was a private link, so it wasn't on any kind of site where she could monetize it. There didn't seem to be a reason other than the fact that she wanted people to watch her. I didn't know what was happening. I felt humiliated and I wanted to find a way to get back at her for what she did. I wanted to get back at the guy she was with as well. I looked through their messages and figured out who he was and what he did for a living. I found his social media pages and saw that he was in a new relationship with someone back home. I gathered all the information that I could and I sent the link to the video alongside some screenshots of their conversations to the guy's girlfriend back home. Right away she read the messages. She responded a couple of hours later thanking me for bringing that to her attention and I hadn't spoken to her since. I left the apartment that night and didn't plan on going back. My girlfriend returned home later in the evening and sent me dozens of messages asking me about where I was. I didn't respond to them. What I did instead was reach out to the principal of the school she taught for and I informed them of her online behavior. Because she was a teacher, things like that were prohibited. I knew that what she was doing was likely to cost her her job. A few days after I sent the email, I got a call from the superintendent of schools asking me for more information about it. Eventually she was fired. She reached out to me countless times and begged me to revoke the statements that I made and tell them that I was just saying it out of spite, but I didn't do that. I wanted her to suffer for what she did. If losing the job she cared so much about was that, so be it. Now I am working and trying to figure out my next steps moving forward. I really did love her and it's going to take a while for me to get past what happened. OP, it seems like you cared about your girlfriend and wanted her to be happy. You went out of your way to go to conventions with her and help her with her cosplays even though you weren't interested in it. Sharing sexual photos with men online is definitely a violation of your relationship. It doesn't matter if she never met a single one of them in person, she was sending intimate photos to them. The fact that she met up with a stranger to sleep with them at the convention is already bad enough, but then recording it and posting it in Discord is weird. I'm glad you told the man's girlfriend about it. It's best that she knew before continuing the relationship. It's also good that your girlfriend lost her job. It is a direct consequence of her actions, but it doesn't seem like she sees it that way. I hope you are taking care of yourself and able to recover from this soon. I wish you nothing but the best. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there's a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. This is a hard story to tell. My wife and I were married for 18 years. Some of the magic in the bedroom was fading, I'll admit that, but we were also parents to 2 children, 12 and 16 years old. In an attempt to rekindle our relationship, I got us a new bed frame and mattress, fit for royalty, along with lingerie for her. She loved it, and it actually did help us relax and have a good time. We worked a lot, so I made arrangements for my 22-year-old nephew to babysit for us. When my wife met him again for the first time in 5 years, he'd grown into a young man, and I saw her face. It made me mad. I actually brought it up with her, how her eyes sparkled when she saw him, and I reminded her he's only a few years older than our oldest. She thought I was being ridiculous and denied anything I saw. I'd known her long enough to know when she was excited or liked what she saw, she couldn't hide it. Fast forward another month, and there wasn't much of a change. Nothing that bad, but nothing that great either, even though I was trying. We each had something to do after work, separately, so I asked my nephew to go to our house to watch the kids again. My wife told me she'd be home at the same time as me. When I got home, her car was already there, and so was my nephew's. The house looked dark. I didn't find anyone downstairs, so I went upstairs, pretty nervous about what I was going to find. Our bedroom door was open, and the lights were on while my wife turned off the television. My nephew looked extremely nervous that I was home, seeing him in my bedroom. I asked what was going on, and my wife said nothing, they were just watching television after the kids went to bed. My nephew was silent, looking around the room nervously before he said he had to go. I paid him, hesitantly. He had trouble looking me in the eye. After he left, I noticed my wife's undergarments on the floor, nearly under the bed. I asked her if anything bad happened while I was gone, and she was caught off guard by the question, but she just asked what I meant, and said no. I was just super uncomfortable laying in bed all night. The next day, I managed to pull myself together with an hour of sleep, and sit in my car, ready to leave for work. Before I pulled out, my phone dinged. It was a long message from my nephew. He apologized for having sex with my wife last night. He said he couldn't sleep at all, he felt so bad for what he'd done, and he couldn't forgive himself until I forgave him. The poor kid didn't realize he stole my whole life away from me. Everything I worked for and built with my wife and the mother of my children was gone. I only replied to thank him for telling me, but I was devastated. I couldn't drive, I couldn't move. My wife came out to go to work, and I wouldn't move my car out from behind hers. She expected me to, so she sat in her car, waiting. She was on her phone, and got a message from my nephew, telling her he told me what they did. I walked up to her window, and could hear her on the phone, calling him a little turd for telling me, when she explicitly told him not to tell me anything. She was freaking out, and when she noticed me standing next to her window, she jumped out of her skin, then started crying. I broke down too, because it was hard to look at her. I told her everything we had was done. Over. I started walking back in the house, and she followed me, panicking and crying. She asked me to forgive her for this one mess up. In all the years we were married, she was loyal to me and the mother of my children. She didn't want me to break up our family just because of this one moment of weakness. I told her it wasn't just one moment of weakness, it was a moment she decided she would have sex with my nephew behind my back. It was a choice she made to betray me, her husband of 18 years. I told her I never wanted to see her again. She gave up on us. Our marriage got boring, so she gave up and cheated on me. I was sobbing, which made her sob. I wasn't worried about my ability to move on from this. I was crying for our kids. Their lives were going to change, because of their mom. I was willing to stay with her through thick and thin, no matter what. I would sacrifice and communicate. Whatever it took, but it takes two. I told her to get out of the house. She hadn't brought enough change into our kids' lives. The least she could do was leave the house, so they didn't have to move with me. After arguing, she actually agreed, but warned me she was going to get custody of them. I didn't argue. I knew I could prove her infidelity and irresponsibility. In addition to that, the court ruled everything should remain as normal for the children as possible, so they continued living with me and going to the same school. My wife had to live with her closest relative for a while, an aunt that didn't know her very well, and lived 45 minutes away. The kids were extremely upset. It isn't easy on anyone when a family is broken apart, and each time they spoke on the phone with their mom or saw her in person, it was awkward, and they wanted to know why she broke up with their dad. They told me she would cry when they asked, because there wasn't a good answer, and I knew she felt like a stupid, foolish woman. She eventually gave up carpooling to work in the area, but I think it's because even the people she worked with knew what she did. I became somewhat of a bachelor for the middle-aged women in town, and I couldn't complain. Someone else started watching my kids, but I never told the kids why. OP, I am so sorry your wife gave up your marriage and bond of 18 years to sleep with your nephew. It's extremely disappointing to hear, and I wish she would have thought about the effect it would have on her kids, you, and herself. The whole point in getting married and having children is to find where you want to be for the rest of your life. Surrounded by people you would do anything for, who trust you completely, and some people you actually made, and brought into the world. It's a wonderful thing that people should take more seriously. The world has always been broken, but a successful lifelong marriage shouldn't be as rare as a unicorn. These respectable unions where each spouse puts the other before themselves should be everywhere. If it was so, we would live in a much happier world. The things people have the nerve to complain about are nothing compared to living your life alone, or living a beautiful life that's taken for granted until it's gone. Anyways, that's enough for this story. Let's now get into our second story for today. My wife, 36, and I, 37, were married for 10 years, and it was already time for a kitchen renovation. We each earned a decent amount of money, so for her birthday, I thought she'd really appreciate it if I arranged a contractor to come by and start working on it. After that, I did the planning and picked out what I thought my wife would love most. She was so surprised and happy. While they were busy renovating for the next few weeks, my wife was home alone while I was away on a work trip. She didn't know that I left the cameras on in the house, because I wanted to supervise the people I was paying. I didn't think anything about the cameras, so I didn't tell her about them. One day, 20 minutes after she should have gotten to the house, I asked her how she liked it. I got no response after 10 minutes, which just wasn't like her. I thought of the security cameras, but I didn't think I needed to check on her or anything. I just wanted to make sure she got there safely. I was then surprised to see her making out with the guy remodeling our kitchen. I watched in disbelief from my phone's live camera feed. She took him by the hand and went into the living room. I could just barely see something happening. I freaked out, obviously. I started calling her repeatedly as I drove home. It was a 2-hour drive back, and those were by far the most painful 2 hours I've endured in my life. I didn't tell her what I saw, only that we had to talk immediately. I hated her for what she just did so boldly, as if she didn't have a husband of 10 years that loved her and was helping to pay the man she slept with in the house we lived in together. When I barged into the house, I could see the fear on her face. I told her that I saw what she did on the security cameras. She came out, apologizing to me with all her heart. It was crazy to look at her face knowing what she did today. For some reason, she chose that guy to betray me with. During her rambling, she said he looked at her a certain way when she came downstairs in her robe, and when she stopped by to check on them, he came on to her. I knew it didn't matter, but in the moment, I wanted to prove her wrong and see how this started. I pulled up the recording earlier in the day, and my wife hid her face as I did so. It showed her speaking with AP super close. She bent over right in front of him and moved her shirt over, clear signs she wanted him to make a move. It made me sick. I couldn't believe she didn't think I had the cameras on. I felt like I was watching someone else completely. I hated her. I immediately fired the crew that were working on the house. I told the boss why, and even showed him the recording. He fired AP on the spot. I don't know how I didn't beat the crap out of him. It was great to see him fire though. I moved back into the house without a kitchen and got started on divorce and telling our families. I had the video evidence, but I didn't have to show it to anyone in the family for them to believe me. After we separated, she called me every day to apologize for cheating, ask how I was doing, and if I needed anything. I'd usually tell her to stop calling me, and that all I needed was a smarter woman. This happened about 3 years ago, and since then I've been single. I've had a few one-night stands, but nothing serious. I'm not sure when I'll be ready to commit again. OP, I am sorry your wife completely took advantage of your trust and thought she could get away with cheating on you. You were doing something so nice and considerate to surprise her for her birthday, and she repaid you by doing this inconceivable act. Each step you took was so wise. I'm relieved that you didn't consider giving her a second chance. That's honestly never a good idea. People make mistakes and must face the consequences of them. When a spouse forgives them, it makes them an enabler. They won't learn respect or the value of loyalty. After the door to infidelity is open, and the two stay together, there will either be a consistent feeling of guilt and worry, or an eye for an eye kind of attitude, and that is no way to have a healthy and happy relationship. Your ex certainly had the harsh reality coming to her from her own actions. I wish you the best of luck in healing from this. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. My wife was recovering from having our first baby. Per the doctor's orders, we were waiting 8 weeks before having sex. She was 24 and I was 26. I felt like we were too young to be parents, but at least we were married for 4 years before conceiving. This was the life I hoped for. I did everything right, according to my family, and it made me feel great. One person I met in my past told me that life isn't as simple and easy as I expected it to be, but I was goal-oriented and willing to follow any successful influencer's advice. I believed fate was on my side. Even with what I'm about to tell you, I still believe fate is on my side, because otherwise I may never have discovered the truth. On one of the last days of waiting, I got a notification at work that there was motion detected outside our house, and a box was delivered. I only worked 10 minutes away, and it was lunchtime, so I decided to pop by unexpectedly. Besides opening my package, I thought I might be able to seduce my wife for the first time in forever. I stopped for flowers. When I got to the house, there was a really nice car parked outside. I didn't recognize it. My original plan was to knock on the door and have her open it, but I decided to use my key. As soon as I walked in, I heard our bed squeaking upstairs. I barged into our bedroom door, without realizing I broke it. I could not believe what met my eyes. My wife was sprawled out on her bed with our baby's pediatrician. She immediately sat up and grabbed her face, repeatedly saying no in disbelief. The doctor panicked and ran. I didn't care. I'd have him on camera fleeing our house with his loose pants, which meant I'd probably be able to prove he was sleeping with my wife, which would certainly get his license revoked. I noticed the baby sleeping in the bassinet, 6 feet away from his mother, as she cheated on his father. My wife immediately began saying how sorry she was. She said he seduced her because he knew she waited long enough to heal. I wanted to throw up, but I was too angry and didn't want to appear vulnerable. I told her she was the sleazy, pathetic mother. I asked her why she couldn't have just said no, why she couldn't have just waited for me to get home. I felt myself starting to break down because I was realizing my marriage was over. I didn't want to forgive her. I didn't want to have sex with her. I told her these things, and she wailed so loud she woke up the baby. My mind started working at a mile a second as I held and bounced our son. I told her that since she was breastfeeding, she could take him with her to her mom's house. Her mother was a strict Catholic, and I wasn't even sure she would let her daughter and grandson move in. She was going to be furious at her daughter's behavior, and I'd make sure she knew the truth at some point. My wife was freaking out, telling me what I already knew, that she would have nowhere to go if we told people the truth. I forced her to move back in with her mother by telling her our house was being fumigated. My MIL wasn't too fond of me, so she wouldn't even wonder where I was. After they moved out, a major twist happened. I got an anonymous typed note in the mailbox that said, "Leave me out of it or you won't be around long enough for a second marriage." I was shocked, but immediately knew it was from the doctor. What a piece of crap. I was very amused when I checked our doorbell camera and found him escaping with his pants down. I went to the police and filed restraining orders on him and my wife. Then, I made some phone calls. I had a big family, including one lawyer. He agreed to represent me. Before the court hearing, my MIL was basically forcing my ex and son out of her house, so I had to tell her what my wife did, and how I got a restraining order because my life was threatened. She was beside herself. She told me I needed to come get my son at least, so I did. My wife absolutely hated this, and I think that's why her mom did it. She was so upset with her, but couldn't kick her out. She had trouble looking at her the same way. As terrible as my MIL was, she knew how necessary and important loyalty to a spouse was. Then you add the fact that my wife was a new mother, cheating with her son's doctor. Before I left with our son, I heard them screaming at each other, and when my MIL told her she wasn't mature enough to be a mother or wife. It was intense, but I'm sure my wife deserved this hellish new reality, stuck in her strict mother's house without me or her son. After the divorce, I was awarded primary custody of our son, and I was able to prove the doctor's unprofessional homewrecking actions. He was no longer allowed to practice, so he'll have to find something new to do with his life. I am so happy with the outcome from all this. I hate that it all happened, but this wasn't my fault, so I can only adjust and accept the change. She still calls me often, asking for help or complaining about things. She used to say sorry every time, but I told her to stop. I don't always answer her calls, but she does get visitation with our son. This event made me question a lot about life and relationships. I've realized how important it is to love and trust yourself. I knew I could get through this from the moment I was presented with the issue. I knew I had no choice but to go through it, and all I had was my own strength and willingness to go on. I enjoy my life because it's all I have in my son, and I have a whole new routine. My sister watches him while I'm at work, and she loves it. I enjoy my own company and my son's, and when it comes to dating, I just take it slow and make sure everything feels right about it. That's all anyone can do. I hope anyone reading this realizes how great it is to experience life at all. I won't let this painful end to my marriage make me question how wonderful life is. OP, I am so sorry your wife took advantage of your trust by sleeping with your son's doctor. She was not thinking of you or the consequences you would all have to face for her actions. She was selfish, immature, and impatient. I can't imagine why, as a wife with a newborn son, she couldn't have said no to this stranger and waited for her husband to get home. She gave in to the temptation, despite being a married woman with a growing family. I don't think she expected to be caught, which is why this opportunity seemed acceptable. Never cheat on your spouse expecting to get away with it. The truth always comes out, either immediately or unexpectedly. No matter when the truth comes out, there will be consequences, starting with the shame and guilt they feel when they look at their spouse. A beautiful lifelong commitment is full of honesty, loyalty, and constant communication. There's nothing a spouse shouldn't know about their partner. Knowing this, imagine how hard it would be to pretend everything is fine when you know you've betrayed them. You handled this very well. I wish you the best going forward. Now let's get into our second story for today. When our marriage came to an end, my wife was 37, working as a physical therapist for 5 years. I was 35. We were married for 11 years. We were both content without bringing children into the world. We just started going through the process of becoming adoptive parents, but that would never happen for us. I was proud of her for how hard she worked. She loved her job, and I never expected her to do anything she'd be ashamed of. One day, she came home early. I was off work that day for some reason, and she looked devastated. I asked her what was wrong, but she didn't want to talk about it right away. When she did talk to me, it was like she rehearsed what to tell me. She said her boss noticed she had accumulated a large amount of vacation time. She pretty much ordered her to take a paid vacation. I didn't understand what was so sad about that, but I did know my wife loved her job and felt restless at home. She'd usually clean or keep herself busy when she had to be home, but this time she stayed in bed. She could barely move. I knew something was wrong, but she wouldn't talk to me. I got the mail and found something alarming. It was a letter to my wife, explaining the reason for her immediate termination. I was shocked. I ran on to find that not only was she fired, she was being sued in court. I was so confused. What was happening? I walked like a zombie into her bedroom, finding my wife lying awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. I threw the papers at her and asked for an explanation. Once she gathered them up, she started hyperventilating. Once she calmed down, she probably figured I was going to find out anyway, so she told me what happened. 8 months ago, she'd gotten a patient to work with who was in a dirt bike accident. He was learning how to walk again, basically, and couldn't use his hands for anything either. She had fed him, spoke with him, and really gotten to know him. She helped him to go to the bathroom and shower, and when he asked her to help him with something else that wasn't allowed, she did. I was instantly heartbroken. She was mine, and I was hers. By helping this guy, she sacrificed her career and marriage. What's worse is he was married too. His wife was the one suing my wife and her employer, maybe because he felt bad about it, and told her. I couldn't believe it. She begged me to stay with her because she needed me now more than ever. She didn't love AP, she knew that. She just felt bad for him as his caretaker. I reminded her that the vows we took meant she would be my wife, and only help me with things like that. The same was expected of me for her. She took advantage of the trust she had as a physical therapist, and had sex with her vulnerable patient. For all I knew, she instigated it. She just admitted she spoke with him and got to know him well. Was that her way of telling me she fell in love? His wife didn't deserve this betrayal either, probably while she stood by his side during the long recovery. My wife had a very hard time ahead of her, but I wasn't going to make it any easier. I moved out, waiting for all this to settle before I filed for divorce. After she was found guilty, and in a whole hue of trouble, it was easy for me to win more favor. She owes a ton of money, and can no longer practice physical therapy. I don't know how or if she's moved forward in life. She called everyone she ever met, or came in contact with to ask for help, and was met with a ton of rejections and criticism. She pretty much fell off the face of the earth after that. I don't know if she managed to pay off all that money, or if she was arrested. I never wanted to look into it and find out. By the time I could move back into our house, it was like a tomb of old memories, frozen in a time when nothing was wrong. It was scary. I had help from friends and family to get rid of all that stuff, and put the house up for sale. With the profits from that, I bought a nicer house on land with horses. I grew up with horses, so it really feels like home. I also decided I wanted my home, horses, and self to become a haven for a child in need. Since my wife abandoned me before we were able to adopt, I did it myself. I adopted a 10-year-old girl, who's now 15. I've kept very busy living life on a farm, and with my daughter's help, I give horseback riding lessons. It's like I've lived more than one life, and became a better person after my failed marriage. I'm proud I made it through, and I'm happy my ex suffered through the reality of her choice. Although she says this man initiated the contact, there's no way to know that, and no matter who initiated it, it never should have happened. 2 marriages and your wife's promising hopes for the future were ruined. She obviously wasn't expecting to be caught, and thought it was okay to risk it all for one encounter. It's a shame she couldn't see it would be the worst decision of her life. Marriages are meant to make people stronger, and encourage personal growth. This can help people to become a source of light to those around them. It's a beautiful thing when it happens as it should. You grew wiser because of this unexpected life change. You became a beacon of hope for yourself and your daughter, without the help of anyone else. You are an inspiration, and I wish you continued peace and prosperity. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. I, 39 male, met my wife, 37 female, while we were both in graduate school. I had a work-study as a teacher's aide, and she was in one of the classes that I was helping with. Right away, I could sense there was a connection between us. She would consistently stay late after class to ask questions, and I was getting a strong vibe from her, so I offered private tutoring. From there, the rest was history. We officially started dating after that semester, so there wouldn't be any conflict of interest, and we got married 2 years after we graduated. We spent the past 15 years focusing on our careers and our family. We have beautiful daughters together, and we actually just bought our first house. About a year ago, I was diagnosed with throat cancer, and I had to go through some treatments to help it. It was a scary time for our family. I was very focused on the cancer, and admittedly not much else. I realized that was a problem, but I had practically been handed a death notice, and I was anxious about it. I underwent surgery and chemo to make sure it was completely gone. The good news is, I'm all clear, and have a positive prognosis moving forward. The bad news is, I feel like I have to start my life over from scratch, because my wife cheated on me with our neighbor. The total time that I was in chemo was about 6 months. During that time, I lost a lot of weight, I was sick all the time, and I ended up having to shave my hair off entirely because it was falling out. I know it sounds awful to say, because going through something like this is so challenging, but I couldn't stand looking at myself in the mirror. Before my cancer, I spent a lot of time at the gym, I ate healthy, and I took good care of myself. I never thought I was the most attractive guy in the world, but I was happy and confident with myself. Seeing myself after the chemo was a big shock, and it's still something that I'm working to come back from. About a month ago, I really started to notice there was something going on with my wife. After getting the positive prognosis, all I wanted to do was spend time with my family and celebrate my life. However, my wife couldn't seem to make time for that. She always had some excuse to stay behind when I wanted to go to the movies or the park with the kids. I didn't let it get to me, because I had this newfound sense of freedom in my life. I just wanted to spend time with my kids while I was on Earth. I was really cherishing life at that point. One evening over dinner, I suggested that all of us go to an amusement park when it opened up the following week. The kids were obviously excited about the news, but my wife just rolled her eyes and said that she wasn't interested in going. I questioned it because I wanted to spend time with my family. She told me that she had never been a fan of amusement parks, and she would rather just take the time alone at home to relax and read a book. I didn't want to start an argument, but I was a little annoyed with her. I had spent months thinking I was going to die, and when I was finally okay, she didn't want anything to do with me. I ended up going to the park with my kids, and we had a wonderful time. However, toward the end of the day, my youngest daughter fell and hurt her ankle. It was swelling up right away, and I thought that it might have been broken, so I took her to the emergency room. I called my wife several times, and she didn't answer once. It didn't end up being anything serious, but they gave her a brace to keep on it for a couple of weeks, and we went home. When I got back, my wife was just hopping out of the shower. Right away, I asked her why she wasn't answering the phone when I was calling her. She told me that she had fallen asleep reading. Honestly, I didn't believe that for 1 second. Had she truly just taken a nap, she would have heard the phone ringing when I called her 5 times. With how everything else had been, I couldn't help but wonder if there was something more to her not answering. Later that night, when the kids were asleep, I outright asked her about it. I asked her if there was anything wrong in our relationship, so we could try to fix it. She told me that I was imagining things, and that she just wanted some time to herself. She ended the conversation after that and went to sleep. All I was thinking about was how distant she had been lately. Once I heard her snoring beside me, I reached over and grabbed her phone. I needed to see if I really was just imagining things. I looked through her pictures and her apps, and I didn't find anything, but when I went through her messages, I found some concerning information. I saw our next-door neighbor at the top of her message list, which struck me as odd, so I clicked on it, and it told me everything I needed to know. He had messaged her a couple of months before about how he saw her in her hot tub. It was honestly kind of creepy how he worded it, but my wife was apparently flattered. He said that he felt like she was putting on a show for him, and he was interested in her. Their messages progressed from there, and they made a plan to get together to see if their feelings could go anywhere. It was clear from the messages that followed that they were in a sexual relationship with each other. What was even more disturbing about it was that he was married, and he had 3 children of his own. Both of them were just throwing away their marriages. I screen-recorded the messages and sent myself the recording so I would have it for my own evidence, then I rolled over and tried to figure out what I was going to do. We lived in a little cul-de-sac, and everybody was pretty close. It wasn't unusual for one of us to throw a party or invite everyone over for dinner. So I went to all of my neighbors and invited them over for dinner to celebrate my recent cancer-free diagnosis. They were all ecstatic to go and happy with my good news. The day of the dinner came and my wife and I were busy preparing everything for our guests. Everyone came and we mingled, drank some wine, and had a good time before dinner was served. During dinner, as the conversation lulled, the neighbor that my wife was sleeping with told me that I was lucky to get to so much more time with my family. He then complimented my wife on the delicious food and made a joke about how I was a lucky man. I took that as the prime opportunity to call him out and say that he would know. He pretended to be confused, but I could see in his eyes that he was worried about where I was going. I told him that I knew he was sleeping with my wife. My wife dropped her fork on the plate and nearly spit up her wine. She told me that I was out of line for even suggesting that, then I pulled out my phone and showed her the evidence that I had. Everyone else around the table was silent, but I could see that they were very interested in what I was saying. I had no doubt in my mind they would go home and talk more about it. I went into my office to grab the divorce papers I had prepared. I brought them back into the dining room and gave them to my wife. All the while, my neighbor's wife was asking him if it was true, and he was fervently denying it. I sent her the evidence hoping that it would convince her that he was lying. Not long after that, everybody excused themselves from dinner because it was extremely awkward. My wife was trying to beg me not to do anything drastic. She didn't want me to leave, but there wasn't a chance in hell that I was going to stay. I was curious though, so I asked her why she did it. She told me that she wasn't attracted to me anymore after the chemo. If there had been any chance that I was going to give our relationship another try, it was done after that. I told my wife that I wanted her to get a hotel for the night because I needed to be away from her, and she agreed to do that. During the night, I could hear my neighbors arguing and his wife was throwing his things out of the house. I ended up divorcing my wife and keeping our house. I'm still trying to decide what I want to do with it. I don't know if I want to sell it and move somewhere else or if I want to try and keep some semblance of normalcy for my kids. My neighbors also got divorced. Anytime I ran into my neighbor on the street, he looked like he wanted to kill me, but his wife was thankful that I told her because she didn't want to be with a cheater either. OP, I'm so sorry you had to go through all of that. It's already such a lowly thing to cheat on your partner, but to do it because they were sick and had to undergo chemotherapy is truly disgusting. You were at an extremely vulnerable point in your life and your partner should have been there for you to make sure you were doing okay. Your wife was extremely selfish to even consider having an affair while you were sick. You're truly better off without a person like that in your life. I can't know exactly what the message from your neighbor said, but messaging a married woman telling her that she looked good in a hot tub is extremely creepy. It's kind of even more shameful that your wife fell for that. Either she had been thinking about him for some time or she was just desperate to cheat on you. Either way, I'm glad you aren't going to have to put up with somebody like her anymore. I truly wish you the best and congratulations on your positive prognosis. Now let's get into our second story for today. I, 37 male, met my wife, 31 female, 5 years ago at a book signing. She and I were both big fans of an author who was on a book tour and doing readings at small local libraries. We were both there alone and sat together by chance. We started talking about the books and we just hit it off right away. I asked her out for coffee and from there our relationship blossomed. We were only together for a year and a half when I proposed. We've been married for about 3.5 years. I was actually married before I met my wife. It was quite unfortunate, but I married my high school sweetheart and she ended up cheating on me with a worker, so we had a very bitter divorce. From the start of our relationship, I was very upfront with my wife about that. It was something I was insecure about. I still had some wounds from being cheated on and I wanted to make sure she wasn't going to make them worse. She assured me that when she had her eyes on someone, they were the only person she thought of. It felt good to hear that and I was very confident in our relationship. My wife was very close with her family. When we originally met, we were only living about 45 minutes away from them, but about a year into our marriage, I got offered an incredible promotion at another branch of my company. It was too good to pass up, so she agreed to move all the way across the country with me. It was tough because she was away from her family, but we made it work. Every year her family would all go to a lake house they owned and have a family vacation together. Because of the move and the pandemic, my wife hadn't gone for a few years and she missed it. Last summer, she told me that she really wanted us to go because she missed her family. Unfortunately, it didn't line up with my schedule to go, but I didn't want to keep her from going, so she went alone. I had met her family a few times in person, but most of the interactions I had with them were online. In particular, I was good friends with some of her cousins. They were into a lot of the same things as me, and we even had a group chat together where we exchanged memes and played some games online. I didn't hear much from my wife while she was away aside from the nightly message telling me good night. I was fine with it. I knew she was a family, so I wasn't really too worried about anything. Toward the end of the week, one of her cousins called me. It wasn't unusual for that to happen, but it was a little weird because I knew that they were with family. I answered half expecting there to be a bunch of people on the other end just calling to say hi, but I was wrong. He was practically whispering on the phone, clearly trying to keep the conversation a secret. He told me that he values my friendship and he didn't want anything to jeopardize that. Plus, with everything I told him about my past relationship, he felt like I deserved to know what was happening. My heart was pounding out of my chest as he told me this. Apparently, my wife had been meeting up with a guy that she used to date. He was her summer fling every time they would visit the lake house. Her cousin wasn't able to tell me if they had been sleeping together. He didn't know, but he was a little bit alarmed by how much time they were spending together. It would have been one thing if she'd mentioned that he was someone she would be seeing while she was there. Maybe grabbing coffee with him wouldn't have been the end of the world, but to see him several times while she was away and not telling me felt like a betrayal. I had been through all of that before and I was starting to get really worried. The last thing I wanted was to find out that my wife was cheating on me when my ex-wife had done the exact same thing. I asked her cousin for the guy's name and he told me. Right away, I went on to all of my wife's social media pages and searched for him. I found him on her Facebook and I saw that they had been interacting a little bit on her page. I didn't want to do it, but I had every reason to believe that something was going on. I knew her password, so I logged into Facebook and looked through their messages. When I looked through them, I saw that they had been messaging each other fairly regularly. A majority of the messages were friendly, sharing jokes with each other and just chatting about life. About a week before my wife was set to leave for her trip, she messaged him and told him she would be in town. He was very excited about it and he even said, "How long has it been? 3 years?" My wife replied confirming that. I was shocked to hear that. I had never even heard of a guy before, but he saw my wife 3 years ago. From what I could glean from the messages, he got married 3 years ago and they were together one last time before his marriage. It was also clear from the recent messages that they had planned on being together during the week my wife was away. He had also apparently moved away from town, so he lied and told his wife that he was going on a work trip. I felt absolutely gutted by the information. This was the second time I was going to get divorced because my wife had cheated on me. Maybe it was the anger because it was happening again, or maybe it was just me not wanting to take this lying down, but I wanted to get some revenge on them. The only issue was that I was all the way across the country. After I did some digging, I found out that his wife actually only lived a couple of towns over. It wouldn't have been impossible for her to go and catch them in the act. I thought about what I wanted to do carefully, but I ended up sending her a message through Instagram and explaining everything to her. She was very easy to convince because she had already suspected something was up. I told her that she needed to go and catch them and get some evidence against them. She agreed and I gave her the information for the hotel that I knew they were meeting up at. I waited by my phone all day for her to send me the pictures or videos that she took of them together. She called me a few hours after she was supposed to be there and told me what she saw. When she knocked on the door, her husband thought that it was room service that he had ordered. She could clearly see that he was in the room with another woman, so she stormed in and found my wife in bed. She wasn't able to get any pictures, but my wife left shortly after and she didn't know what happened. However, she asked him why he was with my wife. He told her that there was nothing emotional between them at all. They had a history, but the history was entirely sexual. He even admitted to her that all his life, over anyone else he's been with including her, that my wife was the best sex he ever had. When they were near each other, they liked to meet up just for sex and nothing else. That news really hurt to hear, but it was enough proof for me to leave. My wife and I were living in an apartment at the time, so I packed my things while she was still away and I disappeared. I didn't tell her where I was going. I didn't tell her why I was leaving. When she got back from her vacation, I didn't pick her up at the airport like I was supposed to. She had been calling me and texting me asking me where I was, so I just blocked her number. I ghosted her completely. When she got home, she found a long note that I left alongside the divorce papers. I told her that I didn't want anything to do with her. Thankfully, we signed a prenup, so there was no chance that we were going to have a lengthy divorce battle. The last time I ever saw her was when we were signing the official papers. Now I'm struggling to find another person who I feel like I can put my trust in. It's extremely difficult when two people you have given yourself to have betrayed you like that. OP, I'm really sorry you had to go through something like that. It's awful knowing that your wife knew about your history with infidelity and didn't consider that when she met with her affair partner. She knew that if you found out it would hurt you more than it did the last time. Yet she still did it anyway. It's really great that her cousin was willing to tip you off when they thought something fishy was going on. Many family members would automatically side with the person in the wrong even though they wouldn't want to. It's awesome that they value your friendship enough to let you know, and I hope you still have them in your life. They seem like a solid person to have around. It's just such a shame that two people would throw away their marriages with people that they love because of sex alone. If there is something someone is unhappy with in the bedroom, you can always talk about it and open up a dialogue to improve anything. Nobody has to have an affair to have good sex. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there's a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me.